Hello, I'm John.
Hi, I'm Mia.
Welcome to the Ask Godox community. If you have any questions about your Godox gear, be sure to join our Facebook group. The link is down below. The Godox V1 Mid has been on the market for a few months now, and while many photographers already have it in their hands, there are still some who have questions about it. So today, we've gathered the 10 most frequently asked questions about the Godox V1 Mid to see if we can solve your problems.
That's right, John. Whether you are on the fence about buying one or you just want to see if it fits your specific workflow, we're focusing on real-world pain points and the core features you need to know about.
Let's jump right into question 1. Power. The V1 Mid outputs 55 watts, which is about 2/3 of a stop less than the 76 watts original V1. The biggest question we get is 55 watts really enough?
You know, John, giving a simple yes or no is actually too absolute. It 100% depends on what kind of gear you use and your specific use cases. Let's break down the exact scenarios where the V1 Mid is the absolute perfect fit. Who is this flash actually built for?
First up, the mirrorless camera shooter. If you shoot with smaller, compact mirrorless bodies, like the Sony A7C II, A6700, ZVE1, or the Nikon Z6III, this flash is a lifesaver. The traditional Godox V1 makes these smaller cameras incredibly top-heavy. But the V1 Mid weighs only 413 grams, which completely solves that imbalance and saves your wrists on an all-day shoot.
Exactly. And that lightweight design naturally brings us to the second group, run and gun event and wedding photographers. If you are shooting long events indoors, your main goal is usually just balancing your flash with dim ambient light. For that, 55 watts is more than enough. You don't need massive power. What you really need is stamina, and the new VB22 battery delivers over 650 full-power shots per charge.
That battery actually solves a huge headache for our third group too. Travel photographers. If you are always on the road, pack space is at a premium. Godox built a direct USB-C charging port right into the battery cell itself. You can charge it with your laptop charger or a power bank on the go, meaning you can finally leave that bulky charging dock at home.
And there is one last specific group we have to mention, shooters using standard wide-angle zooms. If your go-to event lens is a 24 to 70 millimeters, the V1 Mid is going to make you very happy. It features upgraded optics that cover 24 millimeters to 105 millimeters, which completely eliminates the annoying wide-angle veneering that the older V1 caused on full-frame bodies at 28 millimeters.
So, here is the ultimate takeaway for our listeners answering question 1. Audit your workflow and your camera body. If you are a mirrorless shooter working mostly indoors, at long wedding receptions, or just using flash to fill shadows, the 55 watts is plenty. You will absolutely save your money, fix your camera's top-heavy imbalance, and save your wrists with the V1 Mid.
Spot on. But we have to be completely honest here. On the flip side, if your specific style relies on shooting outdoor portraits and you constantly use high-speed sync to overpower the harsh midday sun, the V1 Mid will struggle. In that extreme scenario, you absolutely need to step up to the original V1 or the 100-watt V100 for that extra headroom. But for the mirrorless shooters and event pros we just mentioned, it hits the absolute sweet spot.
That's a perfect wrap-up for the power question. Now, speaking of long wedding days, let's move to question 2. Weight and portability. How does the portability compare to previous models? Wrist fatigue is a huge issue for event shooters.
On paper, the weight difference might sound modest, John, but in practice, it's a genuinely noticeable relief. The V1 Mid weighs 413 grams with the battery installed. Compare that to the original V1, which comes in at 534 grams. You are saving 121 grams, making it about 23% lighter.
Exactly. And it's not just the weight, it's the overall physical dimension. The V1 Mid is a meaningfully shorter and slimmer unit. If you regularly shoot with the flash mounted on your camera for extended periods, this size reduction perfectly fixes the top-heavy imbalance we just talked about on smaller mirrorless bodies.
Yes, and this is a great little detail. It uses the newer flip-lever-style lock mechanism. Gone are the days of the old, annoying twist wheels. You just slide it into your camera hot shoe, click the lever, and you are locked in securely. It's a small thing that makes a real difference when you are moving quickly on a shoot.
So the takeaway here for question 2 is simple. If you shoot all-day events and want a setup that's much friendlier to your wrists without sacrificing professional features. The V1 Mid's refined size is exactly what you need. We just talked about how the V1 Mid's smaller size saves your wrists. But what about saving you from battery anxiety? Let's move to question 3. Has the battery life and charging experience actually improved?
It has, in a very practical way. It uses the new VB22 lithium-ion battery, which is a 7.2-volt, 2,200 milliampere-hour cell. Fun fact, this is the exact same battery used in the Godox V480. It delivers over 650 full-power flashes per charge. Compare that to the original V1, which only gives you about 480. That is an extra 170 shots, or a 35% improvement. It gives you incredible peace of mind during a long wedding day.
That's a great number. But Mia, let's be completely objective here for our listeners. Why is there such a big jump in battery life?
That's a fair point. We have to note that because the V1 Mid outputs less power per flash, 55 watts versus 76 watts, it naturally draws less energy from the battery per shot. If you were to equalize the output power of both flashes, the battery life figures would be much closer. The advantage is real, but that gap is partly just a function of its lower power output.
That makes perfect sense. Still, 650 pops is great. Now, what about the charging experience? I know travel photographers despise packing bulky charging docks.
This is where the design gets really clever. When you first open the box, you might actually be a bit confused because there is no separate charging dock included. Instead, Godox built the USB-C charging port directly into the battery cell itself, hidden under a little tab. So, if you're traveling, you just plug the battery straight into a standard power bank or your laptop charger.
That is incredibly convenient. But we need to give our listeners 2 crucial real-world warnings here so they don't ruin their shoot. Warning number 1. There is a second USB-C port on the side of the flash body. Do not plug your charger into that side port, expecting the battery to charge.
Yes, such an important warning. That USB-C port on the side of the flash is strictly for firmware upgrades. If you want to charge the battery, you have to plug the cable directly into the hidden port on the battery itself.
And warning number 2 is about a quirky design detail. There is a little pull tab on the battery. Whatever you do, do not rip that tab off.
Right. Unlike older Godox flashes, the V1 Mid battery compartment doesn't have a spring tensioner to pop the battery out. It is a tension fit, meaning you actually need that little tab to pull the battery out of the flash one. So don't rip it off, or you're going to have a really annoying time getting your battery out.
Love that. Now let's move to question 4. Does the V1 Mid fix the wide-angle vignetting issue? I know event shooters who use 24 to 70mm lenses have complained about this with the older models.
It provides a very practical fix for that, and this is a detail that is really easy to miss if you only look at the headline specs. The original Godox V1 had a zoom range that started at 28mm. Because of that, if you shot at the 24mm wide end on a full-frame camera body, you would often get those annoying dark corners, or vignetting.
Right, and nobody wants to spend extra time fixing dark corners in post-production when you have hundreds of event photos to deliver.
Exactly. Godox upgraded the optics for the V1 Mid, and it now features a wider zoom range that covers 24mm to 105mm. So, if your go-to event lens is a 24 to 70mm or a 24 to 120mm, that 24mm optical start effectively eliminates the vignetting issue right out of the box.
So the takeaway for question 4 is, if you are an event or wedding photographer glued to your standard wide-angle zoom lens, the V1 Mid is optimized for those wider shots, giving you much smoother and more even lighting across the frame. Question 5. Can I use my existing light modifiers and brackets with it? I know a lot of photographers already have a ton of Godox gear, and nobody wants to buy everything all over again.
The short answer is mostly yes, but there are a few very specific caveats you need to know. The good news is that the V1 Mid retains the exact same round head diameter as the original V1. This means your existing magnetic AKR1 accessory kit works seamlessly out of the box. You can snap on your domes and gels instantly.
That's a relief. But what are the caveats?
First, if you like using the snoot from the AK-R1 kit, you will actually need a separate adapter ring for the V1 Mid. It also does not fit some specific modifiers like the ML-CS1625, AK-R22, or AK-R21. And importantly, unlike the V1 Pro and the V100, the V1 Mid is not compatible with the SU-1 subflash, so you can't snap on that little secondary fill light.
Okay, good to know. What about mounting it into a larger softbox? Will it fit the popular Godox S2 bracket that everyone has?
Now, this is where it gets a little confusing, so pay attention. Godox's official product warnings state that due to the V1 Mid's ultra-compact and slimmer body, it does not fit the older S2 bracket, and they advise you to use the new S3 bracket.
Wait, so I definitely have to buy a new bracket?
Well, here is the real-world twist. Some independent studio testers have actually managed to clamp the V1 Mid directly into their existing S2 brackets just fine and throw a softbox on it. So, my practical advice? If you already own an S2 bracket, test it carefully yourself first. But be prepared that you might need to upgrade to the S3 bracket for a guaranteed secure fit.
That is a fantastic pro tip on the brackets. Speaking of hardware changes, let's move right into question 6. Is the new touchscreen interface reliable for fast-paced shoots? I know from the forums that a lot of photographers are actually pretty skeptical about putting a touchscreen on a flash.
Those are very valid concerns, John. It is completely natural to worry about a screen failing, accidentally bumping settings, or struggling to use it with winter gloves on. However, Godox offers a very thoughtful compromise here. On one hand, the 2-inch OLED color touchscreen gives you smartphone-like swiping efficiency, allowing you to slide and adjust power much faster than clicking buttons.
Which is great for speed. But what about those specific hardware concerns? What if I'm shooting an outdoor event and I have gloves on?
That's where the backup plan comes in. They didn't force you to rely solely on the screen. They kept the traditional physical buttons and the control wheel right below the display. If you have gloves on, or if you simply prefer tactile feedback because you don't fully trust touchscreens yet, you can still operate it exactly like older models.
I really appreciate that they kept the wheel. And what about accidentally bumping the screen and ruining your exposure mid-shoot?
They included a couple of practical safety features for that. First, you can lock the screen interface by holding the center button for 2 seconds. Second, there is a dial unlock feature. When you turn the flash on, you actually have to spin the physical dial to unlock it. This prevents the flash from accidentally turning on and draining the battery if it rubs against something inside your camera bag.
That bag lock feature is a solid addition. So the takeaway for question 6 is, the touchscreen is a nice speed upgrade for your workflow, but because it still has the safety net of physical buttons and screen locks, it doesn't force you to change how you prefer to shoot. That bag lock feature is a solid addition. Now let's transition to question 7. How well does the V1 Mid handle fast-moving action and freezing motion? Event photographers often deal with subjects like dancers, so flash duration is a very practical concern.
Looking at the technical data, the V1 Mid shows a measurable advantage here, particularly when shooting at maximum output. At their minimum power settings, both the original V1 and the V1 Mid are identical, reaching a very brief flash duration of 1/20,000th of a second. However, at full power, the difference becomes clear.
What exactly is the difference at full power?
The original V1 has a minimum flash duration of 1/300th of a second at full power. The V1 Mid, on the other hand, starts at 1/600th of a second, which makes it twice as fast. This means the V1 Mid freezes motion more effectively when you are pushing the flash to its limit.
Twice as fast at full power sounds like a clear win. But just to be completely objective, does that gap stay the same across all lower power levels?
That is a very important point to clarify. As you reduce the output power on the original V1, its flash duration figures naturally improve. So, as you pull back from full power, the gap between the two flashes actually narrows. But if you are in a situation where you need maximum light output and still need to freeze motion, the V1 Mid offers a genuine advantage.
So the takeaway for question 7 is, if your work involves fast-moving subjects in lower light, like a wedding reception dance floor, that 1/600th of a second duration at full power gives you a practical edge for sharper images. That 1/600th of a second duration gives you a practical edge. Now, moving on to question 8. How well does the V1 Mid fit into the broader Godox ecosystem? A lot of our listeners already own triggers or other strobes, and they want to know if it plays nicely with what they have.
It integrates very smoothly. Like most of their modern gear, it runs on the Godox 2.4 GHz X wireless radio system. This means you can use the V1 Mid directly on your camera as a sender to control your off-camera strobes. Or you can take it off camera and use it as a receiver, controlling it with triggers like the X Pro or the new X3.
That's a big plus for photographers who like to mix and match different lights. Are there any specific workflow features that stand out when using it in that system?
Yes, there is a very handy feature called TCM, which stands for TTL Convert to Manual. If you are in a rush, you can take a quick automatic TTL test shot. If you like the exposure but want to lock it in so it remains consistent for the rest of the shoot, you just use the TCM function, and it instantly converts that TTL reading into an exact manual power setting.
That's a great way to get a quick base exposure without having to guess or use a light meter. So the takeaway for question 8 is, whether the V1 Mid is your very first Godox flash or in addition to a larger lighting setup, it communicates natively with your existing X system gear and brings smart time-saving tools like TCM to your workflow. We've covered a lot of the technical features. Now, let's move to question 9. Let's talk about the price, the overall value, and that specific name. Godox called it the V1 Mid, which on the internet can sometimes imply that something is just mediocre. Is that the case here?
The name definitely caused a few jokes on the photography forums, but Mid here strictly refers to its position in their lineup as a mid-range option. It slots in between their smaller compact flashes and the higher-end 100-watt-second V100. It is not an entry-level flash, but it's also not their heaviest professional strobe.
That makes sense. So, where does it sit in terms of pricing?
It currently retails for $179. When you compare that to the original V1, which typically sells for around $199 to $259, you are looking at around $20 to $50 difference. For that lower price, you do trade off about 2/3 of a stop of power, but you gain the USB-C charging, the lighter weight, the wider 24mm zoom, and the touchscreen.
So the takeaway for question 9 is, don't let the Mid name mislead you. At $179, it provides a very competitive balance of modern features and portability, making it a cost-effective option for photographers who don't need the maximum output of the flagship models. We've covered a lot of ground today. Let's wrap up with our final point. Question 10. Does the V1 Mid include a modeling light, and how practical is it? Many photographers rely on modeling lights to preview where shadows will fall before taking the actual shot.
It does include one, and it is quite functional for its size. There is a 2-watt LED modeling lamp built into the front of the unit, which is daylight balanced at 5,300 Kelvin. You can adjust its brightness from level 1 to 10, making it useful for previewing your light placement or simply assisting with autofocus in dim venues.
That sounds helpful. But a common concern is whether the continuous light from the LED might bleed into the final exposure, particularly if you are shooting macro or working very close to your subject.
That is a valid point. Godox included an interrupt setting in the menu specifically to handle this. When enabled, the modeling light briefly turns off while the flash fires and recycles. This ensures that the continuous LED light doesn't have a chance to affect your final flash exposure.
That is a well-thought-out detail. So, the takeaway for question 10 is, the built-in modeling lamp offers a convenient way to preview your lighting and assist with focusing, while the interrupt feature ensures it doesn't interfere with your actual capture.
Well, that wraps up our 10-question deep dive into the Godox V1 Mid. From its lightweight design and that 650-shot battery life, to the upgraded 24mm zoom range and the practical modeling light, we've looked at the objective facts of what this $179 flash can and cannot do.
Exactly, Mia. We've seen that it's not about having the most raw power, but rather finding the right balance of portability, speed, and reliable Godox ecosystem integration for your specific daily workflow.
So, if our breakdown today helped you decide that this flash is a practical fit for your camera bag, please click the link in the description below to purchase one for your kit. We want to hear your real-world feedback. Click the link below to join our Ask Godox community. Whether you want to share your lighting setups, discuss gear combinations, or ask technical questions, it is a great place to connect with other photographers. See you next time!
See ya!